We have one more speaker, Helen Storey, our finishing conversation. So this will actually be a conversation with Helen. And Helen, I know you're online, but I think you've been having some internet challenges. So let's see, there you are. Hello. So I think that Philip's going to share your presentation, right?
Thank you. Can I be heard? I'm hearing every other word like I'm on another planet.
Oh no, you're gonna have to go back and listen to the audio and video recordings. You are loud and clear, I'm glad to say, but if we do experience any problems, then maybe I'll just ask you to turn your video off while Philip's presenting, because sometimes that reduces the space it takes up on the internet. I don't know, don't explain.
Sure.
So yes. So this is a little different, perhaps, than some of the others. First of all, Helen is the only artist in residence for the United Nations, or in fact, it's the UNHCR, so the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, and specifically at the Za'atari Refugee Camp in Jordan, although I know your work has since expanded from that. But we're going to have a conversation, and we decided to finish with this because when I first asked Helen if she would participate in this forum, she was a bit reticent at first, and we had a long discussion about what those reasons were, because I've had Helen come speak to my students about the work that she does, and it's always incredibly inspiring and incredibly insightful. So, but she's at a bit of a crossroads, and she will be able to speak to this a lot better than I can. But in terms of questioning how and when it's appropriate for us to talk on the behalf of other people. So, or whether and when it's more appropriate and when it's more ethical in turn to give them a platform to speak for themselves. So this is one of the many challenges that quite a few of us have grappled with. I do to a lesser degree when I work with artisans in the global south, you know, about working with them and not assuming what it is their needs are and so on. So part of those questions are, what responsibilities does it bring when we do talk on behalf of others? And so I think I'd like to start perhaps with you talking a little bit about your work and your role in the UNHCR as the designer in residence at the Za'atari Refugee Camp in Jordan, but also perhaps how that's expanded since, because I know you're also working in Zimbabwe, I think it is, and how that position came about, because that's a first, right?
Yes. I mean, this still started off located in something that we might recognize as fashion. In fact, you could go to the next slide, actually, Philip. So there are so many things that have happened on this this afternoon where I kind of resonate with all of it. And one of the things that I really resonate with is this idea that fundamentally what might be underpinning the loss side, the grief side, is that we've fallen out of relationship with each other. Belle was talking about empathy, and I think empathy has become the thing that is guiding my work. This particular piece here, it was a single piece of fashion that started off by being a response to a provocation that the climate scientists in the Met Office gave me 10 years ago, when they were looking on the horizon and quite desperate in how they were going to be able to communicate what was coming our way, and realized that both the fashion industry and the music industries, with their massive fan bases and the fact that we're all interested to some degree in what we put on every morning, if we could start to talk about climate in those terms, using fashion, using music, might we be able to start that conversation earlier? And this was just ahead of the excuse me, then 2015 climate summit, COP21, which at the time was being hailed as the last time our humanity had a chance to get it right. I've had a history of working with scientists for the last sort of 30 years on clothing that can purify air and clothing that becomes, you know, alternative substrates for growing things in. And this to me felt like something that simply had to be responded to. And I started off thinking it had to be a piece of sort of fashion technology, because that's what was the thing then, and realized actually a cloth that had humanity already in it was the way to go. And I was sitting, ironically, in an airport on the way to my textile designer in order to try and find what this new fabric should be, when all I could see walking from Syria to Jordan in the night were the start of one of the mass exoduses from Syria into the Jordan border. When I started showing this dress around, it was the questions from children that I had no answers for that really, really resonated with me. Everything from whose is that footprint? Who used to live there? Where are the children now? And I gathered up all these questions, took them back to the UN and said, these children deserve answers. What can I tell them? The answer I got back from them was, we don't know. If you want to know, you're going to have to go to the gates of the refugee camp and find out. So a piece of fashion, if you like, a fashion artifact, took me to the gates of a refugee camp. And from then on, my life completely changed. I realized that, maybe onto the next slide. I realized that what happens when you go to a refugee camp is the very first person you meet is yourself, is your own belief systems, your own sense of what's right and wrong, your own ability to take in what it is that you are seeing or not. And I realized that really I had to let go of everything I thought design was meant for and begin to work in terms of need. So what is needed here, and responding to that. So it was the dress that took me to the gates of the camp. All my images have got stuck, so I'm not quite sure what's on screen at the moment.
One of the Za'atari camp itself and the huge.
Okay. So if I can tell you a little bit about this then, this image is it's probably 2 years into the fleeing from Syria. You can still see some of the kind of tents in the foreground. It's a place of 80,000 people. There are 35,000, not loaves of bread, but pieces of bread created a night. The 50% of the people in the camp are children. There are 80 babies born a week. There are weddings, and it's an extraordinary place. And I realized pretty quickly it's a place of incredible innovation. And so I realized also what I was beginning to encounter is that these people, for the most dreadful reasons, have much to teach us about all our futures. And in that sense, it was something that I wanted to try and maintain. It felt more important than any research question I might have. It felt more important than any project I might have, and to some degree more important than any career. And there I began to get to know the different populations. I don't, if we can go on to the next slide, you might see some of the camp and what it looks like.
I think for me, Helen, one of the things that really strikes me is, you know, your vision of what a refugee camp might be from the outside, never experiencing one, is radically different than the reality. And I have never been to a refugee camp, but I have worked significantly in favelas in South America. And again, the vision of what people think those regions and those spaces are like, they are full of life, they're full of innovation, they're full of love and loss and all of the breadth and depth of humanity. Yes.
I mean, camps, the Za'atari, and certainly the camps I now work in Africa, they kind of hold the tensions of all of our lives. So everything from, you know, constant urgency and yet having to be incredibly patient, particularly with long-term displacement. The idea that you might receive an education, but you have no prospect of a job. Yes, sustainable by definition, and yet this constant longing for more. In Za'atari's case, we were just 20 minutes away from the border. So 20 minutes away from a home, but a home you may never return to. So this always keeps a kind of level of heightened emotion around. And it's been strange now, sort of 7 years I've been working in Za'atari, where there's a sort of almost a unique social relationship where I am neither an NGO, I am neither a university professor. It's a new social relationship with people who may never leave Za'atari, even though they long to. And what it is that the power of making can bring in that space of deep, deep inequality. So we have very little in common. I don't share the faith. I don't share what it means to have to flee for your life. I can't possibly understand that. And yet to work with people for whom those things are real, where trauma and heartbreak are a part of the everyday, you have to do a deal with that in some way. And I think what they have to teach us about hardship, what they have to teach us about suffering, and yet still be able to make something beautiful in the dust. These are some of the things that I've been learning along the way.
And you're already talking to a degree about the challenges, but there are very specific challenges that you face, obviously, when you're working with marginalized communities, and particularly when you're an advocate for them and when you choose to speak on their behalf, and what responsibilities come with that.
I think maybe if we can go to the 6th slide. I get very anxious when I think that I'm speaking on behalf of the refugee people I work with. And I think what is an antidote to that anxiety is to realize that what we make together should do the speaking. So there are, if on screen you can see this rather wonderful pencil. This is the first piece of art I saw when I came to the camp. It's symbolic to me in all sorts of ways, and was made by the man on the previous screen called Tarek. To me, this image, this kind of hand that is coming out of nowhere seemingly, is the miracle that is being asked of all of us now, in terms of stepping up to what the relationship between climate change and migration is. Tarek started off his life as a construction worker in Syria, and yet when he arrived in camp with nothing to do, he started picking up the found objects that were around him. And again, I think it's in the previous slide, you'll see his toolbox with which he made these incredible pieces. Philip, I think there's another slide after this which shows some of his other pieces. I still don't know technically how Tarek does the one on the left, which is a chain pencil. There's no glue there, nothing. It's completely carved out of one single piece of lead. And the kind of leap forward together that we had was that what would happen if his work became wearable. So that was something that we worked on. So I guess, Sass, what I'm saying is I wanted the work to do the speaking, and the work to be the bit that people remember. It's very difficult to stay connected to things that are very challenging or very upsetting. But actually, if you can create things which are wondrous, they stay in the mind a lot longer. And I think that's one of the mechanisms for helping us stay connected to some of the most difficult things that are happening in the planet at the moment.
There's an incredible preciousness to the work that's on screen, to the skill of it, and the fact that it comes out of nothing really, but becomes something incredibly meaningful and very beautiful.
You mentioned earlier, I think, about this, the value of craft and livelihood. So these things are also not just made for the sake of it. That refugees, quite rightly, you know, the last thing they want to do is to be kept busy. They want their works to meet the marketplaces, to be able to create and earn a living by their creations.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that we talked a little bit about, you know, the question of when to be silent and when to speak, but also when to act. And then this role of coming from somewhere else, not sharing the religion and the history with these people that you speak on their behalf, and the role that colonialism, and there's a whole myriad of things in there that impact our ability to speak, right? Yes.
I mean, I've seen things that are truly horrific and truly inspirational, and both render you silent in quite an amazing way. I think in terms of checking myself for colonialism, if you like, checking myself for where am I trying to over-influence something or over-control something. The best thing to do is always to start from a place of pride. The pride, whether that shows itself through the way in which people choose to cook, how hospitable they are, or the pride in the skills that they already have. So I think that's one of the main ways that it's been possible to trust each other in this process. And empathy and trust are absolutely key in what we end up creating together.
I'm assuming that also plays a role in this difficult journey that you have, where human suffering really lies at the epicenter of the people and the experiences with whom you're working.
Yes. I think the answer is you have to agree to feel it, no matter how difficult it is. There was a syndrome that I came across. In fact, I think it may have been a Syrian medic who first coined it. And the acronym is HDS, which is short for Human Devastation Syndrome. And it's PTSD on steroids, basically. And it's something that forces its opposite to happen, so that something can be truly traumatic, but your capacity for joy also becomes heightened. And it's back to these opposites. The image that's on the screen at the moment is made by the Tiger Girls, and this is a group of young girls I work with. The acronym they gave themselves is "These Inspiring Girls Enjoy Reading," and basically what can't be spoken is painted. And what you can see here is actually one of the things that they suffer from often is early marriage. And so part of my early relationship with the UNHCR was introducing us to this community of girls to come up with projects that were born of their wishes. And I think if we can go on to, I think it's slide number 12, you can see on the right-hand side what the realization of some of those wishes were. So on the right-hand side, you can see two girls who appear to be on a catwalk. The wishes that they asked us for were they wanted to be warm in winter. In Za'atari, it's below freezing, way in the winter, and it's because their homes are now metal, their ovens in the summer and fridges in the winter, and so being warm is important. They love glamour and bling, and so they wanted a way of being able to produce clothes that spoke to their personalities and their wish to celebrate themselves, no matter what. And they wanted something to gift. Syrians are amongst the most hospitable people on the planet. Not being able to gift is a kind of deprivation, so they wanted to make something that they would also be able to gift. And then halfway through, when we were in a making workshop most people would recognize, they said, could we have a fashion show? And it was quite surprising back at college. People said, do you think that's appropriate in a refugee camp? And to go back to that living of the opposites and holding the tensions, absolutely. The need and the draw to celebrate and to be joyous in a refugee camp, as I say, is heightened enormously. The ladies on the left there are creating a scent. They told us that one of the things they fear the most is not being able to hand on what Syria means to their children who are born in camp. And so we decided to create the scent of Syria. And I managed to bring in some excellent perfumiers, and they created the scent that they could then have in their homes and put on their clothes. And that meant that they could begin to keep the next generation in touch with where they had all come from.
Helen, do I remember this also expanded into some commercial product soaps, if I remember?
Yes. So speaking to Tatri's and Dina's presentation, we've had about sort of 15 or 16 projects in the camp, but one of them, speaking to people where pride starts, it is in embroidery. I don't know if you can see the next slide, but on that slide, on the right-hand side, it was an opportunity also for people to tell their own story. So the women have things they want to tell us about their lives, about their talents, their skills, and their dreams. And the lady on the right was embroidering what you can see there. And I asked her what it was, and she said, "Oh, you would recognize this as a comma," and as in a punctuation mark, the comma. And she said, "These represent the pauses in my life, and the war keeps stopping my life." And so what we realized, that just as making something beautiful is important and it leading to a livelihood, so is sharing who you are, so that you are not forgotten. And on the next slide, you will see the culmination of about 5 years worth of work in terms of professionalizing that embroidery. And unseen in all of this is how they live by it. So one of the things that we've long worked on is economic freedom. And what we managed to do in this project was piggyback, if you like, the UNHCR mobile wallets, which would normally only, its main function would be to give like winter payments and things to people, but to allow a company who then commissioned these beautiful pieces to pay the women direct for the first time. So progress in refugee camps is very, very often tied to the laws of the hosting country. And sometimes you can only move at the speed of those laws, even though I've come to realize that there are multiple truths and multiple perspectives. There's always a river under the river when it comes to what's happening in refugee camps. And so these embroideries are now for sale. It's a backgammon game, because backgammon again culturally means a lot. And they have a very good now employed relationship with Turquoise Mountain. Turquoise Mountain is the company for whom they now have this creative relationship.
So if anybody interested in purchasing these pieces, they can do that through Turquoise Mountain? Yes,
Turquoise Mountain, yes.
So in terms of many of the learnings and the experiences, what do you see as the new role for designers and design thinking over just making more stuff and more fashion? How do you see that play?
For me, there's a really interesting challenge that is being asked of us, which was if we could apply design thinking to bettering a life rather than making a thing or a new piece of something, what that might look like. And what I'm learning is that the aptitudes of a designer are the ones that are changing. So it's not about asking people to give up design skills so much as opening them up to what they could be. So the aptitudes for me are self-knowledge, and as early as possible, particularly in young people. We teach all kinds of knowledge, but we largely leave the discovery of self-knowledge to the wind. An ability to fathom what is true. We need tools to be able to kind of interrogate the world in unbiased ways. To be a gentle asker of mighty questions, to not be afraid of the big questions. An ability to not just to listen, but to hear. Empathy, which has been mentioned a number of times on this call. Empathy for the other. I think if we got that right, many other things would change after it. To apply kindness at every single opportunity. To know what you truly care about. When you identify the thing you truly care about, I'm just thinking about Belle and everybody on this call, you never run out of energy for that. It is your fuel, because what you're doing is attached to the thing that you're passionate about. And the last two I've thought about is the ability to reimagine what progress and success look like. It might not be success in your terms, but to be involved in that process of inventing new kinds of success, and learn until the end. The main reason I was very nervous about talking today is I've been undone as a designer, and I've been undone as a person, and I don't know who I am at the moment, but I do know I'm in the right place. And what I'm trying to do is to say that actually I think the undoing and the uncertainty and the unknown are all important bridges to where we all need to be. And I think it's just a case of learning how to keep each other company in those spaces, and to learn as fast as we can.
That's an incredibly insightful, I think, statement about, you know, where so many of us find ourselves and the questions that we're asking, and what does that mean in terms of how we become participants in a more sustainable and ethical future. So, and I think that's why we decided that this was better almost as a conversation perhaps than it was just as a straight presentation.
Thanks for entertaining that, Sass.
No, not in the least. I really want to thank you for your work, and for your eloquence in sharing other people's stories. They are both inspirational and humbling.
Sass, can I just, on one last image? I don't know if Philip's got it. It's the image of the black lady looking at the black man.
Oh, that was the one we were on, yes.
It was already there, okay. That's the moment of forgiveness. Her eyes are extraordinary. To me, what we need to do is in her eyes. She is forgiving the man opposite her who slaughtered her family in front of her, and this is the moment that she forgave him. It's taken by my aunt, who is a war photographer, and it just it says everything to me, this picture.
And I think that entirely explains why it is so difficult to find the right words, and the responsibility to find the right words to represent absolute horrors. And I truly appreciate your ongoing commitment to try and tell those stories as honestly and as authentically as you can. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone today as well. It's been food for thought.
Indeed.